What therefore is at stake is a real challenge of the will to lead in a period of turbulence. And that will to lead must reflect itself in new directions. And one such direction is clearly to look at the new growth path that must be followed by many countries that have been previously described as emerging, and certainly for countries of small economies. Mr. Kapoor said that the larger economies are doing fairly well, and capital inflows have begun to start. Of course, the size of even those larger economies in the total global economy is still relatively small. And therefore, its ripple effect to the rest of the world may be selective to those economies that have not yet decoupled from those economies. So we need, therefore, to search for a new path for growth for small economies. And that, I believe, is a challenge that I hope that this conference will embark upon. Given the dichotomy between what must be done tomorrow and what is being done today, there is a need for a search for a new growth path. Whether that new growth path can be predicated on the old assumptions of yesterday's growth path is a question that I will raise in this audience. I hope perhaps that the United Nations can play an important role, being a body that is seen as not having any particular biases, or sometimes not any particular powers, therefore gives it its position to create a new kind of dialogue between the international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and perhaps the World Trade Organization to search for a new growth path, if only for small economies. But I do believe this is required for even the larger economies. Those economies that have been decoupled, like in Africa, and to some extent not integrated in the international financial system and therefore have been saved some of the immediate pitfalls, are not likely to have comfort in a world in which there is fundamental contraction and a permanent loss of wealth. Because at the bottom of all this, there has been a permanent loss of wealth. And therefore, there is no hope that we can regain that wealth that has been lost unless we find ways to recreate the process by which wealth is created in the world and certainly in the economies. What, therefore, we must do in the region is to stop the pretense. Stop the pretense that business as usual is all we have to do, and that there's only a blip in the sky, and that one day, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, the price of oil will return to its high levels, and we will be all once more be able to move along the merry path of prosperity for the political economy. Not prosperity for the real economy, not prosperity for the financial economy, but prosperity for the political economy. If that becomes the objective of political advancement in our country, then we are in for even rougher ride. How it will reflect itself in the future, I am not here to even contemplate. But what I do think is that we cannot put our eyes in the sand and carry on as if this will soon pass, as everything else will. The evidence that have come so far have made it very clear that the tables have turned. The IMF, which was once the instrument for bringing discipline to the emerging markets and countries that are searching for international financial access, has now become, or ought to become, the agency for bringing discipline to the advanced economies of the world. As someone said at a recent seminar which I attended, that the small economies have not done anything wrong to be able to have to pay the price of this international financial crisis. In fact, they have earned their keep from being countries that were on the verge of survival at one time, to the point of being able to say that they have sustained a development path, and more recently, to have begun to become confident that they have built the resilience. But this resilience were in fact put to the test by the external shocks, both of the financial nature and now of the real economy sector. And in that sense, the IMF's discipline has not worked in their favor. To the contrary, the same discipline and conditionalities that were imposed on these economies in the past perhaps are now very relevant to the larger economies like in the United States, who may not pass the test of IMF discipline at this stage. And the second tables that I've turned, which I mentioned rather briefly, is the issue of the dollar-denominated reserve system, and whether that will go under some kind of tailspin in the future. And already, in my view, the entire financial crisis has now moved on to the stage of currency devaluations and currency changes. I see that as the next phase in which we will be faced. What implication that will have for the dollar reserve system in the long-term future is a matter that should be placed on the agenda because it affects our individual countries rather directly. That, to me, is where the tables have turned again. And in that sense, the debate, I said, which once felt that this was an exercise of a crisis in capitalism, later to be seen as possibly a crisis in globalism, indeed is a crisis in how can we recreate the knowledge and the new assumptions upon which the growth path in the future will be based, and how we can really become optimistic, if we can, by creating a new path and a new model for development in small economies. That is the challenge of an academic conference of this nature, and I hope this will be just the beginning for that. Thank you.